Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to go over how to undervolt and overclock your Steam Deck to make it the best it can be. Stay tuned to get better battery life, make the fan quieter, or boost performance beyond the default on your Steam Deck. First, I want to thank everyone who tuned into the stream last week. I'll be doing more of them from now on, and I hope to see you there. Second, I'd like to thank all donors, patrons, and the legend Kirk in Discord for making this video possible by financing another Steam Deck. I didn't want to risk my only deck by pushing the limits of what's possible with overclocks and undervolts, so having another made this video release much earlier than I'd anticipated. Third, this video will cover undervolting the deck, increasing available TDP, and overclocking the CPU, SoC, and GPU. I've been attempting to do memory overclocking, but neither of my decks seem to have measurable improvements using it, so it requires further investigation, and may be part of an advanced overclocking video in the future. Next, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell down below so you don't miss the next video, Hogwarts Legacy's Deck Dive. Trust me that you won't want to miss it. The performance is way better than default. I've left chapters on this video so you can skip to individual processes, but some later sections in this video depend on earlier sections. As a result, I highly recommend that you follow along for the entire video and either do the tweaks alongside me or watch the video again and do them on the second watch. On to testing methodology, all of my testing and overclocking was done with a Q1 2023 256GB Steam Deck with no hardware alterations whatsoever. The only software changes I made were changes shown in this video, and installing Cryo Utilities 2 to ensure that all possible bottlenecks were removed. If you've ended up here prior to installing Cryo Utilities, I recommend doing that first as there's no risk. Check the description for a link to the video. Every benchmark present in this video was tested with an in-game benchmarking tool if available, and I made sure to heat soak the deck for 5 minutes prior to each boot of each game tested to ensure that ambient temperature wouldn't play as much of a role. On that note, the ambient temperature in my apartment is 17 to 18 degrees Celsius, or 62 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, the cryo in my username is there because I like it very cold. I don't have a noise meter, so fan sound recordings were all done with my iPhone 13 Pro's noise meter app and recorded manually. Each was tested from half a meter or about 1.5 feet away, since that's the distance I assume is most common. The room where I recorded is 28 decibels by default, and I made sure to record at a time with no interference. The stock deck recorded an average noise of 33 decibels under load, which is 5 over ambient. Alright, before I explain how to undervolt and overclock, I need to put a big disclaimer on screen. This video is intended to be an explanation and tutorial on how to do both undervolting and overclocking. Unlike Cryo Utilities, which has minimal to no risk, this process is not risk-free, and if you push the deck, it can be very risky. By doing it incorrectly, it could prevent the deck from booting, and it might even need an RMA. As long as you know what you're doing, then you run very little risk of actually damaging the deck, but I just want to say that I'm not responsible to any damage that happens to your deck by following the processes in this video. Valve has been very good about doing RMAs on damaged decks, but I can't guarantee that that will continue to be the case, so as a last warning, here be dragons. In the event that your deck doesn't boot from a process I show in the video, then there's a way to revert the changes you've done, a CMOS reset. Fortunately, it's very simple. First, make sure the deck is completely powered down with the screen off. Second, hold the volume down and 3 dot buttons and then press the power button. Hold the buttons until the symbol appears on screen and then release. Now, wait as your deck reverts all setting changes to default. It may take a few minutes. And there you go. Everything is reset to default. If your deck doesn't boot after this, then you likely need to reach out to Steam support. With all of that out of the way, let's move on to our first major section, the Silicon Lottery and you. The Silicon Lottery is a cute name for a complex topic. Essentially, during the manufacturing process of any computer chips, there are natural deviations. Creating something with parts as small and delicate as modern-day circuits is incredibly difficult, and even small deviations in materials can ruin the whole process. In some cases, these deviations can cause some parts to become useless, some parts partially useless, and some parts are perfect. For example, when making a processor, a chip manufacturer has a certain yield. Some processors get outright scrapped. This is called binning, and it's something that happens on most computer chips. Some processors have a few cores that don't work. Those usually get relabeled to a different model with some cores disabled and then sold. Most of the processors are made successfully and sold as is. However, even in this group, there are some deviations. Some processors barely meet the required quality, and those are the ones that CPU manufacturers need to account for when selling them. They need to make sure that all of that model performs similarly, so they keep all of them at the speed and voltage of the weakest link, so to speak. What that means, though, is that some processors can perform much better, even if they're the same model. If you get a processor that can handle much more than another, you've won the silicon lottery. During my testing, I found that one of my decks consistently had pretty bad results, while the other deck, on the desk back there, had what I'd consider pretty good results consistently. So the variance is very high in my experience. Now that you know what the silicon lottery is, let's move on to the tool that we'll be using to both undervolt and overclock. Smokeless UMAF allows us to access a whole lot of BIOS settings that Valve's BIOS doesn't show us. To use it, you'll need a USB hub with at least 2 ports that can be plugged into the deck. You can use a single port, but it's a real pain. A flash drive of any size. A real keyboard to plug in. Bluetooth will not work, so make sure it's either wired or has a USB dongle, like this one. Once you have those, plug the flash drive into your Steam Deck and go into desktop mode. Now, open KDE Partition Manager and enter your sudo password. You should already have one if you've used Cryo Utilities. Now, click on the flash drive in the section on the left. It'll probably be named USB disk. Next, press the New button in the bar near the top and a new window will pop up. Use the File System drop-down and select FAT32, and feel free to enter a name in the label field, then press OK. Last here, press Apply in the top bar and press Apply in the pop-up. After it's complete, you'll get a notification and you can close the windows. Next, click the USB drive in the taskbar and click Mount and Open on the USB drive in the menu. With that, our USB is formatted and we just need to install Smokeless UMAF. It can be found at the link on screen now and in the description below. All you need to do is click Universal AMD Forum Browser.zip and press the little download symbol in the upper right. Once it's downloaded, open the zip file and drag the contents onto the flash drive. After that's done, so are you. We have a fully functional Smokeless UMAF installation. Now that we have it, let's move on to an explanation of undervolting. As mentioned before, chip manufacturers have to provide enough voltage so that every chip can run it, but some chips can do the same amount of work with much less power. Undervolting is the process of providing those chips less voltage. Your deck will typically run a lot cooler, which will also run the fan quieter. Undervolting can also help maintain higher speeds for longer, which can help improve performance. It usually even improves the battery life of the deck, so let's see how much it helps. Elden Ring had similar results with a small hit to the lows on the high preset, but CPU temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees cooler, and GPU temperatures were 2 to 5 degrees cooler. The GPU alone pulled 1 to 2 watts less when undervolted. Red Dead 2 had nearly identical FPS statistics, but the CPU was 5 degrees cooler, and the GPU also remained frosty during testing even after an extensive heat soak. With undervolting, I was able to go from 1 hour and 31 minutes of battery life to 1 hour and 46 minutes while stressing the deck. That's a boost of 16% to battery life despite performance being nearly identical. Fan noise when undervolted was slightly lower than stock, averaging out at about 32 decibels under full load, only 4 decibels louder than the ambient and 1 lower than stock. Undervolting on the Steam Deck is fairly low risk, but if you push it too far, then the deck might not be able to boot. Most people are able to recover from this using the process I stated earlier, but I'm aware of at least one RMA that needed to be done from pushing it too far. That said, if you have a CH341A programmer just happening to lay around and you know how to use it, you could recover with that by restoring from a BIOS backup. The bottom line is that you don't risk permanent damage by doing an undervolt, but you could need to do an RMA anyway. With that out of the way, let's get into the tutorial. In order to undervolt, we need to boot into Smokeless, which is very simple. First, plug the USB with Smokeless installed into the deck and shut the deck completely down. I also recommend attaching your keyboard at this time. Next, hold the volume down button and press the power on button. Keep holding the volume down button until the logo appears and then let it go. Now, choose your USB drive in the menu that comes up and press A. It'll probably have the manufacturer in the name, but mine is a cheap no-name drive, so I chose SMI here. Smokeless UMAF will boot, and you may notice something odd. The screen is sideways. That's because the Steam Deck screen is actually a sideways mounted tablet screen and the software rotates at 90 degrees. Unfortunately, we don't have that benefit here, so the screen will always be shown sideways when we're in Smokeless UMAF. I also recommend navigating with your keyboard starting now. Go down to Device Manager and then press Enter. Then AMD CBS and then Enter. SMU Debug Options and then Enter. SMU Feature Config Limits and then press Enter. This is where we'll be making most of the changes today, and you'll be back here plenty. Go to SVI3 Voltage Control and change it from Auto to Manual. You'll see a few new entries underneath. The three parts that will be undervolting are the CPU, chipset, and GPU, which you can see below as VDDCR_VDD voltage offset, SOC, and GFX. The first thing that we're going to want to do is change the VDDCR_VDD voltage offset sign to negative. And then the VDDCR_VDD voltage offset to 10. This will undervolt the CPU by 10 millivolts. After those are set, press Escape 3 times until the prompt appears. Then press Y, then Escape, and then move down to Continue, and then press Enter to exit Smokeless, and Enter one more time to reboot. With that, you've officially undervolted. Unless you got incredibly unlucky in the Silicon Lottery, you'll boot right back up. Now, boot up a demanding game and test. It should behave the same as before the undervolt, but maybe a bit quieter and drain a bit less power. If you can play for a few minutes, you're likely good to push the undervolt further. When you're comfortable with the stability of the undervolt, boot back into Smokeless the same way as before and change the VDDCR SOC offset sign to negative and the offset sign to -10, and then repeat the testing. If you're still happy with the stability, do the same for the GFX options and repeat the testing. If you get this far, then all three parts are undervolted by 10 millivolts, which is a small but substantial undervolt. Now, if you want to push it further, then go through each setting again, increasing the voltage offset by 10 on one setting each time. Eventually, you'll either have instability in a game or your deck will take a really long time to boot. If you get to this point, then I recommend booting back into Smokeless and reverting the last setting you changed. It's possible to try changing another offset to undervolt even further, but you may not want to keep on pushing it when your deck might not be able to handle it. Once you're happy with the undervolt, then you're done. You can resume playing games or continue on to overclocking if you prefer. To recap the undervolting process, boot into Smokeless, change SVI3 voltage control to manual, change all three voltage offset signs to negative, set VDDCR_VDD to 10, boot and test, set VDDCR_SOC to 10, boot and test, set VDDCR_GFX to 10, boot and test, and then repeat steps 4 through 9, increasing the value by 10 each time until satisfied. I'll take a moment to cover some questions that I think you guys will have about undervolting. Will undervolting brick my Steam Deck? As long as you follow the process I gave you and adequately test, there should be a very minimal risk of bricking. If you do somehow think you brick the deck, then follow the steps I specified earlier to reset CMOS, and all your settings in Smokeless should be reverted. Does undervolting work in Windows? Yes, undervolting will work for any OS and anything running on the deck. What undervolt were you able to achieve? One of my decks was able to reach -20 on all three offsets, and the other deck was able to reach -40, -30, -30. What do I do if my deck takes a really long time to boot, or it doesn't seem to? I recommend holding the power button to turn the deck off completely, leaving it alone for a few minutes, and then trying again. If it still doesn't boot, then you may need to reach out to support. And with that, I'm going to reset my undervolt to stock and move on to increasing the TDP of the deck. TDP, or thermal design power, is how much power a chip uses. On the deck, when we say TDP, we mean the amount of power that the APU can use in watts. By default, the APU can use up to 15 watts, but you can change the limit right in the 3-dot overlay to limit it lower if you want. 15 watts is the sweet spot for performance per watt, which is probably why Valve chose it, but the fan in the deck can actually handle much more, albeit at a louder volume and a higher battery drain. In the case of overclocking, which we'll do later, we'll need to increase the TDP beyond 15 watts to provide the APU with more power. So how do you do it? The TDP increase is a bit more difficult to do than undervolting, as it's a several-step process. Before we do anything else, we have to make sure that the old fan curve is enabled on the deck. The new fan curve prioritizes sound over thermal performance and can cause some overheating if enabled. In game mode, go to Settings, System, and scroll to the bottom and disable the updated fan control. That's it for the fan. Let's move on to actually increasing the TDP. The first step is to set the TDP to maximum in the deck's BIOS, so let's start there. Shut the deck down completely, then hold volume up and press the power button. When the logo appears, let go of the volume button and you'll see a screen with 4 large buttons. Go to Setup Utility, then Advanced, then set Power Control to Manual, and make sure that both the fast and slow PPT limits are set to 15,000. Now, press the Select button and then Yes. Once that's done, you'll be back in SteamOS and the first step is complete. The second step is using Smokeless to set the desired TDP limit. Boot back into Smokeless using the same instructions as before, but this time go to Device Manager, then AMD CBS, then SMU Common Options. Set TDP control to manual, and then set the TDP to the wattage you want to use, followed by 3 zeros. Then set PPT control to manual, and set the fast PPT limit and slow PPT limit to the same value that you set the TDP value earlier. Here you can see that I chose 18 watts, so I enter 18000 in all 3 options. After those are set, press Escape 3 times until the prompt appears, then press Y, then Escape, then go down to Continue, and press Enter twice. With those 2 steps out of the way, the hardest is behind us. The final step is to get SteamOS to actually use the higher TDP limit, and for that, we need PowerTools. To get PowerTools, first you'll need Decky Loader. You may already have it, and maybe even PowerTools. If that's the case, you can skip this section. Otherwise, watch on to figure out how to install it. Go to desktop mode and open your browser, then go to the Decky Loader repository on GitHub. The link is on screen and in the description below. Next, we need to click on Download, then move the downloaded file to the desktop. Double-click on Install Decky, and enter your sudo password when asked. Then choose Release and press OK. With Decky installed, return to game mode and press the 3-dot button. You should notice a small plug symbol near the bottom of the panel. Navigate to it and then press A. Now, press the little marketplace icon near the top, which opens the plugin store on Decky. Go down until you see the plugin PowerTools, then press Install on it, and install again in the pop-up. After a moment, you should see the menu appear again and PowerTools will be present. To recap the TDP change process, disable the updated fan curve in SteamOS, boot into BIOS and set both PPT values to 15,000, boot into Smokeless, change TDP control and PPT control to manual, set TDP, fast PPT limit, and slow PPT limit to the desired wattage you want to use, followed by 3 zeros, boot and test, repeat steps 5 through 6, increasing or decreasing the values until you're satisfied, and then install Decky and PowerTools. Let's move on to some probable questions about this process. I used PowerTools for overclocking before. Where is the pt_oc.json file? The pt_oc.json file isn't necessary in PowerTools 1.3 or higher. PowerTools 1.2 had a bug which had issues after sleep and resume when using an overclock. This was caused by attempting to set the kernel to manual clock modes at frequencies it doesn't support. By avoiding pt_oc.json completely, using the newer version and not manually setting frequencies, the kernel will clock up to the limits you set and allow for you to set the TDP, as you'll see in a moment. In the future, it's possible that the AMD GPU kernel module will begin accepting unsupported frequencies, but in the meantime, there's no benefit to maintaining the pt_oc.json. What's a reasonable setting for wattage? Unless you know what you're doing, I would recommend sticking to 20 watts or below. Is this harmful for the deck? It shouldn't be, as long as you keep the numbers reasonable. Will increasing the TDP work in Windows? It should, as long as the drivers don't hold it back. That said, I haven't tested it directly. Isn't more heat really bad for the deck? The deck's APU is actually rated up to 105 degrees Celsius, and the deck will forcefully shut off before that can be reached. If this happens, lower the TDP settings by a watt and try again. This also applies to the upcoming overclock process. Do I need to do this? Of course not, but it will allow your deck to use more power and give you an edge in performance in many cases. What were your best results? One deck was able to sustain 21 watts and the other was able to sustain 23 watts in all games. Can I change the TDP limit in the deck overlay still? Avoid using the built-in TDP limiter since it keeps you at 15 watts or lower. Instead, use the PowerTools section labeled Power Play Limits and set both bars to the wattage of your choosing. Note that using a TDP higher than you currently have set in Smokeless will just use the value that you set there. As an example, if you set the TDP to 18 watts in Smokeless and then use 30 in PowerTools, it will still only use 18 watts. With questions hopefully answered and enough power to feed the beast, let's move on to an explanation of overclocking. So what is clocking and how does it go over? Let's start with clocks in regards to computer chips. A clock is essentially a very small crystal in a chip that vibrates very quickly, and every time it vibrates, the chip can do some work. The frequency at which it vibrates is expressed in a unit of hertz, with 1 hertz meaning 1 vibration per second, thus 1 operation per second. The chips that we have now are very fast, and the CPU in the Steam Deck has a clock speed of 3.5 GHz, which means that the crystal inside vibrates 3.5 billion times per second. The process of overclocking is basically forcing the crystal to vibrate faster than it does by design, which in turn increases the amount of operations per second that a chip can perform. Why is that important? Cyberpunk had averages on low increased by 9% and averages on high increased by 5%, along with a substantial boost to lows and 97th percentile on the high preset. Elden Ring had a 6% and 4% boost to averages. As a result of the chip doing more work, it consumes more power, which is why we increased the TDP earlier in the video. As a side effect of this, the battery life is roughly 59 minutes when maxed out, which is a 35% reduction over my baseline of 1 hour and 31 minutes. Fan noise when overclocked was higher than stock, averaging out at 36 decibels under full load, which is 8 decibels louder than the ambient and 3 higher than stock. If you want to know more about this, then please subscribe, because I plan to cover clock cycles and how we teach rocks to think in future videos. But for now, this explanation should suffice for the deck in particular. First, we'll overclock the CPU using our old pal Smokeless once again. Boot back into Smokeless, go to Device Manager, then AMD CBS, SMU Debug Options, and SMU Feature Config Limits, the same place where we did undervolting earlier. Scroll down to C-Clock Fmax Override Control and change it from Auto to Manual. Then go down 1 setting to C-Clock Fmax Override and set it to 3600. The stock frequency of the CPU is 3500, so this means you'll get a 100 MHz overclock. Exit out of Smokeless the same way as before by pressing Escape 3 times until the prompt appears, then Y, then Escape 1 more time and go down to Continue and hit Enter twice. Now, boot the deck and start a demanding game. Then play for a few minutes and make sure everything is stable. Once you're satisfied, your overclock is complete. If you want to push the overclock further, increase the value of C-Clock Fmax Override by 100 again in Smokeless and then reboot. Here I'm setting it to 3700 this time. You can repeat this process until you have instability, the deck gets too hot, or the fans get too loud. Once you find the right value for you, you can either be done or you can continue on to overclocking the GPU as well. The process to overclock the GPU is essentially the same as the CPU. Boot back into Smokeless, Device Manager, AMD CPS, SMU debug options, and then SMU feature config limits. Scroll down to GFX Clock Fmax Override Control, right below where we set the CPU. Change it from auto to manual, go down one, and set it to 1700. The stock frequency of the GPU is 1600, so we're starting with a 100 MHz overclock, the same as the CPU. Now exit out of Smokeless, same as always. Boot the deck and do the same testing you did earlier for the CPU overclock, making sure to pay attention to the temperatures, fan noise, and any potential crashing. Then repeat the process by increasing the frequency by 100 until you're satisfied or start seeing instability. To recap the overclocking process, boot into Smokeless, change C-Clock Fmax Override Control to manual, set C-Clock Fmax Override to 3600, boot and test, repeat steps 3 and 4, increasing C-Clock Fmax Override by 100 each time until satisfied, or until the numbers get higher than around 4200. Change GFX Clock Fmax Override Control to manual, set GFX Clock Fmax Override to 1700, boot and test, repeat steps 7 through 8, increasing GFX Clock Fmax Override by 100 each time until satisfied, or until numbers get higher than around 2200. Let's go over some questions you guys might have about overclocking. What's a reasonable overclock on the deck? I would consider a CPU clock speed of 3800 MHz and a GPU clock speed of 1800 MHz to be fairly safe for most people, as long as you haven't lost the silicon lottery. Is this harmful for the deck? It can be if you push the frequency too high. As long as you don't set the numbers to something crazy, you should be fairly safe though. Will overclocking work in Windows? Yes, it should. What were your best results? My first deck had 3800 on CPU and 1900 on GPU, and my second deck had 4000 on CPU and 2000 on GPU. Okay, so now that we've undervolted, increased the TDP, and overclocked at the same time, where does that leave us? We can do all three at the same time. Using the instructions from each section, you can find a good balance where undervolting will save you some power and heat, and you can use that overhead to increase your overclock even further. In my case, I was able to set my deck to -40, -30, -30 on undervolt, increase the TDP to 23 watts, overclock the CPU to 4000 MHz, and the GPU to 2000 MHz. Let's see some comparisons to see what it did for my performance. Cyberpunk gets 9% and 7% boosts to averages for low and high respectively. But the major win here is in the lows, with 1% getting a 16% boost and 0.1% getting a 27% boost on high. Elden Ring gets a modest boost of 4% to averages on low, but the lows are once again the star of the show here with boosts across the board. And Returnal gets 5% and 8% better averages for low and high respectively, plus much higher 97th percentile results and a healthy boost to lows on the low preset. Despite this looking like a fairly minor improvement, the actual gameplay felt quite a bit smoother and was a locked 30 in some places, even without any upscaling whatsoever. With FSR, it got even smoother, although I didn't take any dedicated benchmarks for that. All of this was while maintaining an average battery life of 1 hour and 25 minutes while going full tilt, which is only a 7% decrease from the 1 hour and 31 minutes I get in an identical situation without either overclocking or undervolting. Fan noise when both overclocked and undervolted was identical to stock, averaging out at 33 decibels under full load, which is 5 decibels louder than ambient even with the old fan curve. Hopefully you can see that these modifications can be a huge boost to performance. I just want to take 1 second to reiterate that not everybody can expect the same results as I've gotten. Some will get higher and some will get lower, depending on your place in the silicon lottery. As an example, my original deck here was only able to get -20 on all 3 undervolts, a TDP of 21 watts, a CPU overclock of 3800 MHz, and a GPU overclock of 1800 MHz. Which is significantly worse than the new deck. You may want to see more overclocking in action, and I have good news for you. My next video will be a Hogwarts Legacy deck dive with overclocking results. The performance with the tweaks I found was already a big boost, but I can promise you that you won't be disappointed by the performance with overclocking. What I found was enough to move this video ahead of the Hogwarts video, so make sure that you Like the video if you want to see me stream more. I'm contemplating on streaming Tears of the Kingdom when it releases. Comment what values you managed to get for your undervolts and overclocks. I'd really like to know what the Silicon Lottery is like on the Steam Deck. Subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when the new Hogwarts video releases, along with some really exciting hardware modding that I have planned. Well, there you go. It's a brief but hopefully comprehensive intro and tutorial to both undervolting and overclocking on the Steam Deck. While researching for this video, I found that many of the tutorials weren't very in-depth and didn't explain why you may want to do any of these things. So I hope that you learned something from this video and are able to implement it if you choose to. I'd like to thank all of my patrons, YouTube members, and donors for helping me get the Steam Deck in order to make this video. If you're interested in supporting me, check out my Patreon linked on screen and in the description below. You get sneak peeks, ad-free viewing, and access to a patron-only section on Discord. If you want more free performance boosts, or want to learn a little bit more about your computer, then click on screen to check out my CryoUtilities 2 launch video. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.